For Black History Month, one of my favorite autobiographies of all time. This is The Big C by Langston Hughes, the great poet who pioneered a form of poetry called jazz poetry. And this book makes it so clear why he was the perfect person to do that. Langston Hughes did not have an easy childhood. His father ran away to Mexico to search for gold, and his mother and him experienced the deep anti blackness that occurs in the United States. Eventually, he did go to Mexico and see what it was like to be there on his father's place looking for gold and to experience being black in Mexico. And then eventually, he started working on steamer ships and crossing the Atlantic. And so he got to bring his books along while he was going to visit African nations and seeing what it was like back in Africa. One of the most touching parts about this book is his relationship to books. At one point, he says, "You see, books had been happening to me." And I think to any of us who grew up in these other worlds, there's something really appealing to see how much it affected one of the greats of all time and how much he grew up in this world where books just created so much of his world and opened his eyes from growing up in the Midwest. So then eventually he jumped ship in Europe and went to Paris with like zero money. But he wasn't a jazz musician and didn't have any skills for the jazz boom going on there. And so he found it really hard to get a job. But he paints such a colorful, beautiful picture of France while also painting the picture of how racist France can be. And as someone who lives here now, it's still something that's true. That's why the French hate the Americans. They're actually pretty similar. But then he starts making trips back to the United States, and he gets involved in the Harlem Renaissance. He is one of the key members of the Harlem Renaissance. And some people say this is one of the best analyses of the Harlem Renaissance to ever be done. And so to have this master poet talking about learning his craft somewhat, it's not really a focus of the book, but at least you get to hear some of that. But also to see what this giant explosion of creativity was like in Harlem is a fascinating thing to see. So I'm going to end with one of his most famous poems called Harlem. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode?